Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, welcome back to the Koala podcast. And in this episode, we're going down to Cape Town in South Africa to talk to Trenton Birch, the founder of Cheeba Africa, an education outfit and also consultancy. And he's going to tell us a lot more. The reason I'm talking to Trenton is we're working with him on a conference at the end of May 2025 for anybody who's listening to this in the future. And we're just going to talk about his business, what he does, and why we're working together on a conference to try and elucidate people a little bit better on why South Africa could actually be one of the future jurisdictions for major cannabis. Trenton, before I talk too much, welcome to the Koala podcast. Thanks for being on. Give us a little bit of background about the company and when you started it and why you started it.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. We started just over 6 years ago. Can't believe it's been 6 years already. I think anything in the cannabis industry seems like a second.
I know. I mean, I think I'm 10 or 12 years ago now already. It's just like, what happened?
Yeah, it's crazy. But we started the company because, I come from the music industry originally and then was in sort of creative media education. And cannabis has always been something I've been very passionate about, its ability to in our country to drive, seismic job creation. And then from a hemp environmental perspective, the opportunity it has to really help catalyze and move us towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, plus also from a medicinal side. So it's just an incredible plant. So I've always been part of my life for a very long time. And when cannabis started to sort of rear its head in South Africa and we realized there could be an industry, I looked at my experience and where I could provide the best value. We just sort of dove right into it. So we've now been operating for just about 6 years. We run a physical campus in Johannesburg where we teach the entire cannabis and hemp supply chain. We also do online courses.
Is that just for South Africa or is that for across Africa as well? Have you got other people coming in asking you to teach them about stuff?
We do. We have people coming in from across the continent. We've actually had, students from Turkey, from Germany. So we've had international students as well. And then we go in and do training into different African countries. So we've got, we've trained in Malawi, Lesotho, Zimbabwe. We've got a number of projects as well through our consultancy that we're doing in the Congo, Uganda, so we're sort of doing a lot more work across the continent as the continent opens up.
You say you're doing consultancy work in places like Uganda and the DRC. In Uganda, I wasn't aware that there was any legislation in play. Is that hemp work? What is it?
That's medical cannabis. So we're working with a company that has a medical license already. In that particular territory, you get issued a license before you build. South Africa is the other way around. So we are consulting and helping these guys build out a sizable medical facility. The Congo is completely different. That's a hemp project at the moment for hemp CBD to be shipped into various different territories. So that's a startup. It's been going for a year. So we've come in to help with cultivation, supply chain management. At the end of the day, one of the biggest challenges to any African country trying to get into this market is access. You've got to cultivate to the demand. The market isn't developed enough to just cultivate what you want and then try and put it on the open market, as you're aware. So we're trying to continually figure out country competitive strategies, utilizing landrace strains, utilizing, outdoor cultivation. I know there's not a massive market for that at the moment, but we believe there's a huge possibility of.
Well, it's interesting because I just received a paper from a scientist at Berkeley. He used to be at Berkeley yesterday because he wrote a paper recently about energy. He's an energy use guy. And that's exactly what he's talking about at the moment in the US, having to relook at all this because of the hidden cost of energy use in industrial cannabis is out of control. And actually, Africa probably can like speed ahead of everybody else at 100 miles an hour simply because it doesn't have to spend that energy use.
Absolutely, it's just not clean to cultivate cannabis indoors, So I believe there's a market for indoor cannabis because of the consistency, but I believe that the fact that we're splitting recreational and medical cannabis, and those are the only two categories, I believe is a big mistake. We should have medical, we should have recreational, and then we should have something in between, which is like complementary medicines, which isn't regulated by big pharma. Obviously, still needs to be regulated, but it needs to work in a completely different way. You've got the whole plant medicine approach. You've got utilizing it for sleep and anxiety. I don't need to go to a doctor to get a prescription to use cannabis for sleep or mild anxiety. So I believe there's a future a market for Africa, but we've also got to be clever about how we move and navigate into the international market, because without anywhere to sell our product, we're dead.
In terms of Africa, so this is one of the reasons that we're talking, because of this conference that's been held at the South Africa Cannabis Expo at the end of May, is how are you finding connecting private and public in various jurisdictions in Africa? Is private way ahead of public like it is in anywhere else on the planet? I mean, what's the nexus on that? Yeah, look, it's a conversation that could go on for 6 hours, but
Sure.
but in terms of
The elevator
like
version.
general understanding, where are we? Is there a general understanding? I mean, South Africa's fairly sophisticated in its legislation, but I get the sense that as always, the politicians understand the legislation they've created less than the private sector.
The challenge across the continent is, and I don't think this is unique to Africa, but
No,
a lot of
definitely not.
governments are afraid to legalize recreational cannabis because they'll lose votes, or they think they'll lose votes. So, everybody's happy to talk about hemp and medical cannabis. In Africa, it's quite sad because most of the medical licenses are only for export. So it's like you can cultivate this medicine for other countries, but you can't cultivate it for your own people, which is completely counterintuitive of anything logical. But there is South Africa does have a massive grey market, as we call it. We reckon there's about 1,500 clubs / inverted commas dispensaries, some operating on a defensible model, some completely illegal. But there is a nod from government in terms of legislation. There's a thing called the private purposes bill, so you can cultivate and consume cannabis in a private space. So the clubs have used that legislation to open up. So there is a nod to the fact that they understand that there needs to be a recreational market, but medical is pushing forward, hemp is pushing forward, but we still have no real legislation on trading for the rec market, or the responsible adult use market, as we try to call it.
And do you think that too many different camps in government, so that takes a long time for them
Yeah.
to come together on that? Is that the main issue? And what about law enforcement? I mean, for example, in places like Australia, law enforcement is, they get such great budgets from busting cannabis grows all over the country the whole time. They're really anti losing those budgets, which is, I think, one of the main reasons that Canberra and also the state governments don't really push too hard on the adult use. I mean, is that sort of similar in South Africa, or are law enforcement sort of like, what, we've got plenty more to deal with?
So sadly, no. I think there's a lot of law enforcement that are now turning a blind eye to the industry because we have a lot more to deal with. We have a lot of serious crime here. So I think there's fatigue but there are still people being arrested. It has decreased dramatically, but there are still arrests taking place. Also, law enforcement just are not educated. There's been no training, no education. So they don't know the difference between a hemp and a cannabis plant. I mean, you can't always tell the difference by looking at it, but they don't even know what the different applications are. So we need urgent education into those forces, because there's obviously corruption, etc. On a political level, and also to your sort of first comment, the left hand has no idea what the right hand is doing. We recently saw a gazetted government mandate to ban cannabis in food. Sorry. Now that obviously includes hemp, which is a superfood. So that went out without other parts of government knowing about it. So our president reined that in quite quickly. We went to war as an industry and managed to get that overturned within 2-3 weeks. But the fact is that this Minister of Health went completely rogue. Obviously, our opinion is that any health department in government is in the back pocket of big pharma. So there are disconnects all over the place. There is movement. There is talk. There are master plans. There are committees. There are things that are happening in the background. So I am cautiously optimistic, but at the end of the day, this plant is being driven by the general public and the private sector. Government have to come on board because we have been driving it, and because the opportunity to drive job creation is blatantly obvious, and any government needs to tick those boxes.
And what about sort of the professions outside cannabis who could be involved with cannabis? So if you look at the US, we're looking at an environment here that sort of looks a bit like 2010, 2011, where, lawyers didn't really know about cannabis. The judiciary didn't really know about cannabis. Bankers didn't really know about cannabis. Not that it's an industry that they immediately want to jump into, but do you feel as though in South Africa, there's all that education that needs to be done as well? Learning about cannabis in a positive way would help the plant become part of the wider economy?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at somewhere like Jamaica, they actually the government funded a television campaign to educate the Jamaicans. I mean, we all think that weed is just natural in Jamaica, but it was also illegal there.
Well, Jamaica's a very conservative country at a certain level. I mean, anybody who knows Jamaica knows that.
Yeah. More guns and churches per capita than anywhere else in the world, apparently. But the reality is they ran a television campaign to educate their people that cannabis was not bad and that there were lots of uses for it and the hemp applications. And, the minute government and leadership come out, it does help accelerate things rapidly. From an advocacy perspective, as industry people, we can say what we want. But, the minute Ramaphosa, who's mentioned cannabis and hemp in many, like 3 or 4 of his State of the Nation addresses, the minute he starts to bring that into the forefront, it destigmatizes it on a massive level. But there's huge interest in it. We have legacy in cannabis. Interpol say we're the 3rd largest exporter of illegal cannabis in the world. Some of our strains can be found in Amsterdam coffee shops. Girl Scout cookies is a hybrid of the Durban poison. So we have this legacy. We've got, they reckon there's 140,000 hectares of illegal cannabis cultivated in Pondo land in the Eastern Cape every year. That's large volumes of grow. So we have this legacy. Our traditional healers and have been using cannabis for medicine for decades as part of that sort of medicinal plant medicine toolkit. So it's not something new to us. We just need to capture the essence of that and capture the legacy and the history and package it and also pull our socks up as an industry and become, this is also a professional space and we need to be more professional as an industry. But there's huge potential, but government do need to play their part in educating the masses.
And getting back to education and your company, where are you finding that initially you're providing the most specific courses? Is it cultivation? And what are you looking to widen out to over the next sort of 2 to 3 years?
Cultivation, I often describe the cannabis industry like the music industry. If someone wants to get into the music industry or into the film industry, the first thing they want to do is they want to be the actor or the vocalist, because that's all they see. When people see cannabis, they think they have to be a cultivator. So a lot of people think that's the only.
That's exactly why I asked the question.
Yeah, we obviously know that that's only one small section, especially if you take the hemp downstream value chain into consideration. So, people come in wanting to be cultivators, leave wanting to do something completely different in the industry. We're very holistic in the way we teach. So, we teach, we have a 12-week course on campus, for example, where we have 35 lecturers. We have medical, cultivation, sustainability and development, and then cannabis business. So you learn to extract, you learn about the supply chain, you learn about security, marketing, cultivation, the entire value chain. So we're trying to create people or put out people that actually have an understanding of the supply chain, because we're not at a stage in our economy, our cannabis economy, where people can afford to specialize. You have to understand how you fit into the bigger picture. We also have accreditation from the department, from the Council of Higher Education, which has been a very painful process, but we have a 1-year high certificate, which we've launched, haven't started yet, but have launched. But we're very focused as well on sustainability. For example, if you learn cultivation through us, you also learn permaculture, because we believe that, if you can't monocrop, you do monocrop cannabis, but if you're learning just to cultivate one plant, but you don't understand soil science and other different kinds of modalities and plants, you're never going to be a great cultivator. So, we do meditation, mindfulness, futurism, all kinds of other stuff within our courses. So we kind of look at ourselves as a bit of a future school. Cannabis and hemp are our core at the moment. We do have plans to expand into other content, future farming. We've got some courses in permaculture, aquaponics, hydroponics, and some sort of futurism stuff as well. So we're constantly looking at the market. Where we've had the least traction, actually, which is, I guess, obvious but frustrating, is in the medical market. We have a lot of content we've licensed in for medical marijuana 411 in the States, which is accredited in 7 different US states. It's very, very high grade content, but just trying to get doctors to come to these courses is like pulling teeth. They are completely in the back pocket of big pharma. Doctors in the modern day and age are not healers. They are chemical pushers, to be blunt. So we've had disappointing traction in the medical space. Although a lot of doctors talk about it, they're afraid. They're afraid to publicly come out and
Well,
endorse.
that's an issue I've noticed very much so, especially not so much in the US. I think they've been through that process.
Yeah,
Especially
they have.
Australia has a very conservative,
Yeah.
doctors' bodies and associations, and a few go out simply because they can work with a medical cannabis company who pays them a lot for prescriptions, but it sort of creates a wall within the profession, which gets worse rather than better, sadly. I did want to ask one question before we go, and I know cultivation isn't the main, as you said, everybody wants to talk about cultivation, then comes out thinking about other things. But what I'm really interested in is you want to have huge job growth in South Africa. Are people thinking about training farmers to have cannabis as only part of their annual cropping? So they still grow maize, they still grow whatever they grow, but cannabis is like it has been in the grey market, it helps to be a cash crop. What is agricultural policy in South Africa at the moment towards how cannabis has grown? Are they just thinking about it as a monoculture, or are they trying to integrate it into the wider agricultural economy?
So it's a great question, and I think that rotational cropping obviously has huge value in terms of protecting the soil. We do have industrial farming here. We have massive farms that cultivate thousands and thousands of hectares of maize, for example. For them to rotate crops makes complete sense. Those farmers are still quite conservative and still very slow to come to the marketplace. When you're talking cannabis, you've got your medical facilities that have licenses for the medical market, the very small.
And are they growing themselves, or are they outsourcing to others to grow for them?
No, you get a license, and we have facilities. There are 85 licenses out in South Africa at the moment, medical licenses. The challenge here is that we have lots of legacy farmers that just cultivate cannabis at a small scale. But those farmers, because a lot of the commercial farmers have not been able to get their offtakes realized, they've been pushing cannabis into the illicit market, which has essentially been taking the food off the table of the legacy farmers. So it's a very unique, complex situation. I guess the only place I can really compare it is certain countries in South America. You have large volumes of rural people who grow small scale, and then form co-ops, but the reality is that there is talk about a legacy license for people to cultivate into the medical facilities, so that it can go through a GMP process. There's talk about that, because at the moment, we have
That sounds like a vote winner to me. That sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it can work. It can't. Who knows? Because the problem is that a lot of these farms still can't get their product out. So you can open these farmers up. We need a recreational market. That's what we need. It's the elephant in the room. People want to smoke weed. They want to consume cannabis. For recreational purposes or to relax or whatever it might be. That is the market we need to open up. With this whole over control and trying to get legacy farmers to cultivate cannabis to the standards of big pharma, it's impossible. So without if we could get a license into a medical cannabis facility might be one step forward. But if you can get a license to cultivate into a cannabis club, that's going to open the market up entirely. And we already have masses of people cultivating into the cannabis clubs. There's millions of rands worth of or dollars worth of transactions happening every year now in the grey market. So if we could formalize those cultivation facilities and allow them to cultivate into the rec market under restricted, under licensing terms, so that we can control quality and protect the consumer, that will blow this market out of the water. But this whole thing about trying to cultivate for the big pharma industry is just dead. It has value, but it's not going to drive job creation. It's not going to help the people that actually need it on the ground.
Well, I know, and to be honest, the Canadians, the Israelis, and others already tapped that market, haven't they?
Completely, and they've dominated that market. And so, when I go overseas and I speak to people, no one's interested in having a conversation about anything unless it's indoor. The narrative is changing. There's no doubt about it.
Well,
Because,
I mean, the people I speak to in the US, that narrative is changing as well because they've seen what indoor does. Because it's essentially the same as the processed food industry in the US. That's what's becoming, and it's actually becoming unhealthy for people. So a lot of people who started this whole cannabis thing in the US are now going back and saying that, we took a wrong path and we've really got to be looking at a more holistic way of dealing with this.
Absolutely. Outdoor, sun-grown, organic cannabis. That is the future in my eyes, especially if it's for medicine. It's just so simple. And the cost, the cost of cultivating outdoors compared to indoors is not even comparable. It's like a bicycle and a Ferrari. They're not even in the same category. And price will eventually win. As countries like Thailand and countries in South America can produce. The quality needs to improve, but it will improve over time. Consistency, I understand, is a challenge. If you're using cannabis for something like cancer, consistency is key, and you can get consistency indoor.
That's just developing markets and certain strands within a market, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a bright future, but it's, one thing I always say is that I think you agree. We've just had enough. It's like this is just bullshit, to excuse my language. Let this thing go and let us get on with it. Regulate it. Protect the consumer. But just stop slowing it down. I often say we're at war with big pharma, big alcohol, which, cannabis is a massive threat to alcohol at the moment, especially if you look at the stats in the States. It's mind-blowing.
I know, well, I've just had that discussion with somebody yesterday. Look, Trenton, we're running out of time already. I was only going to do 10 minutes, and of course, it's gone on for much longer. Thanks a lot for being on the Karma Koala podcast. I'm going to do a little pitch for both of us because we're both putting on this conference at the South African Cannabis Expo in